Alright, listen. Superman is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. The new movie is around the corner and I can't express how excited I am for that. But in the meantime, I want to look back on another immensely popular version of the character. I've talked extensively about that version, but for now I want to take a break from the movies to discuss a TV show. We need to talk about Superman and Lois. I've only just finished Superman and Lois, and I'd be lying if I said it was a wholly positive experience. It seems like everyone is in love with the show, but I just don't get it. I really don't. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely elements of the show that I think are excellent and should even be a blueprint for other adaptations to build their own world, which we'll get to in a bit. However, there's a few glaring reasons that I struggle to enjoy the show. This ranges from some minor issues that pop up a couple times per season, something more pervasive that pops up every other episode, to things that take me out of every single episode without fail. In this video, I'll be going over my own feelings on this show, both positive and negative, and explaining why I can't love Superman and Lois. Spoilers, obviously. My favorite element of the show has to be the adaptations of the characters. This, to me, hits the sweet spot of being faithful enough to the source material to make it come off as very respectful, but doing such radically different things with the characters. As someone that's not enormously invested in characters like Steel or the Eradicator or Morgan Edge, this is great. It's so completely different while feeling very distinctly Superman and fitting the tone very well. There's three prime examples of this that I want to briefly go over. Firstly, I want to talk about Doomsday. I really don't like Doomsday. He's a really boring character to me, if you can even call him a character. His only real function is to kill Superman, and then he becomes just a big powerful monster. While all the power scalers might be absolutely creaming, I couldn't care less. Superman and Lois's version of Doomsday is probably my favorite version ever. Instead of just being some random monster, he's Bizarro, mutated into a big monster, which immediately gives him more texture. On paper, that's not all too different from the DCEU's version of Doomsday, but then that was General Zod, who is also a boring villain, so this is much better. Also, I gotta pay a little respect to the show for doing a fake-out Doomsday that turns out to be Bizarro, only for that to turn into Doomsday in the end anyway. Love to see it. That being said, I still don't like him. He's still boring to me. A big monster go stabby stab. Congrats, can we do literally anything else? Then there's Parasite. I'm gonna be honest with you, I did not get that this was supposed to be Parasite when I first watched it, but now looking back, this is an S-tier adaptation of a villain. Something I really like about the way the show is structured is that the villains aren't just Superman villains. They are, as the title suggests, Superman and Lois villains. While Superman and Steel were busy with Bizarro, who was clearly more geared toward Clark, Lois had Parasite to worry about. It's a great way to not split Clark and Lois between fighting villains and dealing with family drama, and having them both be crucial to both parts of the story. This version of Parasite is a cult leader, and Lois essentially loses her sister to that cult. This could then be seen as her equivalent to Clark losing his powers from contact with Parasite, and is, in my opinion, much more interesting. Making characters like Parasite and Lex Luthor as much villains of Lois as of Clark, if not more, is just pretty damn awesome. The only one I take some issue with is Onomatopoeia. She's also more of a Lois Lane villain in the show, and I like that. She's connected to the cancer storyline, which is one of, if not the best storyline in the entire show. But I don't know what any of this has to do with this character. In fact, I'd argue, in many ways, making this an adaptation of Onomatopoeia takes away from the character. I was gonna say something about her only being Ono in name, but that's not even true. She's never referred to as Onomatopoeia, so it's literally just the character's design, which is a black trench coat and a mask. Between her powers, speech, name, function in the story, and relationship with various characters, she is just an original character. Onomatopoeia has no relation to Superman as a character, and there's other sonically powered characters to choose from, like any sonically powered character. Crucially, there's no thematic connection between this character and Onomatopoeia in the comics. The closest thing I can even think of is going after the little guy and covering it up as a parallel to targeting non-powered heroes and Ano's speech patterns, but that's not anything at all. That's just nothing. The key difference between this and Parasite is that Parasite was taking the concepts inherent to the character and applying them in a more realistic or personal way. This doesn't do that, or anything. The iconography doesn't amplify the story elements, it detracts from it. Because now I'm thinking about Green Arrow, and that distracts me in ways that I can't even say because of YouTube TOS. My biggest issue with the adaptation thing is the design of the superheroes and villains. I'm not gonna lie to you. they're all ass. The only exception to this is the flashback Superman suit, which is great, but that's also in all of 3 scenes in the entire show. So let that speak for itself. The steel design for most of the show looks like a nondescript military version of Iron Man. Talbro, and by extension the Eradicator, were just slightly more high-budget versions of the Blur from Smallville. Doomsday looks extraordinarily ugly. Don't even get me started on Jordan's suit. Then there's Superman's suit. I don't know what it is about this suit specifically that makes it feel so ugly to me. Maybe it's the lack of trunks, maybe it's the really dark blue, the elevated and tiny symbol, maybe it's the sculpted on abs that always seem to look either too high or too low, but I cannot say I like this design. By extension, this applies to Bizarro too, although I prefer that one because the point is that that's supposed to look dark and off. For a show called Superman and Lois, they make sure to really nail the 2 titular characters, and I really respect that. At least they're great when it's the 2 of them. The rest of the cast feels like a concerted effort to weigh them down. Lois and Clark are specifically shown to be good parents with clear values and some personal issues that can affect their values and how well they do as parents, but only in key moments. Except for when they aren't. I don't like the way this show handles the relationship between Clark and the twins. Most of the time, Clark is a decently sensible parent, putting down firm boundaries but making sure not to overstep and giving them enough freedom to be themselves. That's a key arc of his in the first season of the show, and it's pretty well executed. I do kind of need them to stick with it though. Do you remember in Smallville, when people in Smallville used kryptonite to make themselves stronger, and Clark protects one of the people involved from the fallout even though they 100% tried to murder him? Yeah, this show does something kind of similar, but bad. In Season 2, Jonathan's girlfriend Candace is shown to deal X-Kryptonite to high schoolers to make them stronger to play small-town football. Jonathan partakes once, in part because he knew his opposition was doing it, and in part because his brother was the one to get powers instead of him, and gets busted. He refuses to identify the dealer and takes the blame himself, getting thrown out of school. There's a lot of decently repetitive conversations about this, but the reason that I bring this up is because Clark, Superman, is really mad at his son for protecting someone else. He actually goes up to Jonathan and tells him something along the lines of, look, I understand that you're protecting someone you care about, but that's bad, actually. You are not Man of Steel Pa Kent. Get some more consistent morals. Another big example of this is the very first episode of Season 3, which I'd argue is probably the best season of the show. Season 1 is a close second. Jordan has decently defined powers and is now going out as a superhero against his dad's wishes to save people. This ends up not going super great, as Jordan makes a mistake that causes some property damage and puts people in danger. Luckily, Clark is there to make sure it all goes well. They meet up at the Fortress of Solitude afterward, and Jordan explains it from his perspective. He got lost flying home and saw something going wrong, so he went to go help. What does Clark say to this? Does he tell Jordan, you messed up, but that's okay. Your intentions were good, this is how you could have done it better. Or, I told you to stay out of trouble because you're not quite ready yet, but I understand why you did what you did. I would have done the same thing. Or, get mad at him for putting people in danger. Or, try to reach out to his son in literally any way? No, of course not. This is what he said instead.
Jordan, you disobeyed me. You put everyone in the vicinity of that building in danger, and on top of that, you almost revealed yourself to the entire world. Home now. And unless I tell you it's okay, never do that again.
If you're adapting Superman and you're having him make repeated appeals to his own authority in a conversation with his son about him trying to help people, you have not adapted Superman. That is someone else. By the way, this isn't setting up an arc for Clark about him having to be more mindful of how he approaches his relationship with his sons or how his head is getting too big. It's setting up an arc for Jordan about being too flippant with using his powers. The narrative sides with Clark here. It's a small thing, I know, and I'm sure it comes off as a nitpick, but this kind of dialogue choice pulls me out of the show whenever it happens and kind of repulses me a bit. Comparing this to Smallville is so weird because Smallville treats the 16-year-old Clark as a person with valid thoughts and feelings about when he should help and what his priority should be. But this show just kind of goes, yeah, Clark is Superman, so he knows best, and the twins have to deal with that, and when they don't, it's framed as subordination. Until the last season, where they finally talk about how they have some agency too. This is literally after Superman has already died. They had to kill him off and bring him back for them to even functionally be allowed to question the rules he set in place. This is just so weird. This type of thing happens a fair few times in the series, and every time it breaks immersion because it feels like they're reaching out of the screen to hit me in the face with Superman sucks, actually. That being said, there is some beautiful stuff going on as well. For my endless issues with the relationship between Clark and the kids, Lois and Clark are great characters. They're very much in line with their original comic selves while having having a lot of development in the show that sets them apart as mature and authentic people. The three best examples of this, in my opinion, are Lois's cancer storyline in season 3, Clark's aging in season 4, and the miscarriage from season 1. These are extremely vulnerable and personal storylines that are handled with a good amount of nuance and discretion. They come off as genuine, and that's something that I have a lot of respect for. I want to quickly bring up My Adventures with Superman here, because it's a good comparison in my opinion. That show doesn't feel very authentic to me. There's moments of it, definitely, like with The Brain and Mala, which just so happens to be my favorite episode of the show, but overall it feels plasticky, stilted, and fake to me because of its over-reliance on cliches. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I personally don't like it. For the same reasons I have issues with Lana Lang in Smallville and those stupid moments where two people are either in a relationship or clearly heading there and one of them gets kissed by someone else without their consent just as that person walks in, leading to them drawing conclusions. Because it's been done so much and isn't believable within our world, we don't buy it for fictional worlds either. This is called cultural verisimilitude and is basically what creates cliches. The difference is that My Adventures with Superman does it in a shorter format, meaning that the progression has to be a lot quicker. For me, that makes it even less believable. Superman and Lois does this type of drama a lot too, and that's one of the biggest issues I have with it. As opposed to My Adventures with Superman, which moves through these things a bit too quickly, Superman and Lois moves through the same things way too slowly. Clark and Lois themselves may be excellent most of the time. The same cannot be said for all of the other characters. I am so sick and tired of these people, man. Jordan, and Jonathan, and John Henry, and Natalie, and Chrissy, and Lana, and Kyle, and Sarah, and Sophie. Shut up! Shut up! Go away! These people pissed me off so much the entire time. Firstly, Jonathan and Jordan. They're fine. I don't have as much of a problem with them as some of these other characters. They're just annoying sometimes. They benefit from being somewhat involved in the Superman-based storylines, but even their human drama stories are usually better than the others. They've got a pretty decent dynamic going on, especially when the new actor for Jonathan comes in later on. They're pretty fun. That being said, they're still used very inconsistently. The first 2 seasons put a fair bit of emphasis on the fact that they're in high school. It's meant to ground the show a bit, to keep the Superman part connected with Smallville, and to explore Jordan and Jonathan and their personal issues after moving to Smallville. Then in seasons 3 and 4, it's just gone. They're 16 here. It's not like they graduated. They go back to school maybe twice. It's so strange, especially when you take into account that this just causes the two of them to only function as the children of Lois and Clark, with a side of sometimes being friends with someone in Lana's family. I understand why they wanted to focus more on Clark and Lois, since those are very obviously the best characters of the show, but it does not work out for the twins. If the alternative is the type of cheap, undercooked drama that has everyone blaming Jordan for being cheated on and then broken up with, only for that to never be addressed, I'm good with that. Then there's the rest of these people. This is so aggressively ass, you're gonna have to bear with me on this one. These characters should not be here. Straight up, every single one of the characters on screen should have left the show somewhere during season 3 at the latest. They're just there to take up space. That's the only thing they do. After Lana and Kyle divorced, they had a little thing about how that family works, which on paper isn't terrible, even if it has nothing to do with the rest of the show. So there's no reason for them to still be in the story in season 4, as becomes extremely obvious by the fact that they don't do anything for that entire season. John Henry and Natalie had some interesting stuff going on in season 2, with them trying to assimilate into this new world. This was expanded on in season 3, with this universe's version of John Henry being a key plot point. After that, again, they're just there to be there. They don't do anything meaningful. Chrissy is just here to be reporter number 2, when the two main characters are both famously investigative journalists. What's going on? Why are you here? The characters staying around is indicative of a larger problem with these CW drama shows where you have a bunch of people that are just sitting around becoming increasingly annoying for no real reason. Letting go of these characters and giving them a solid endpoint would do a lot to make them less annoying. This goes for the broader multi-season scale, but also for single episodes. Sometimes you'll be watching a great episode and then there's a 15-minute block in the middle about some useless drama that'll be resolved in this episode and never mentioned again that does nothing to add to the themes of the episode. Then it's not a good episode anymore. This is the most literal example of watering down a show that I can imagine. The wine of it being a Superman show is dragged down by these insufferable clowns running around with their random B-plots. But if all of that wasn't enough, there is one more thing that makes this show borderline unwatchable, and that is the way that the scenes are written. I'm talking specifically about the more drama-based scenes here. Anytime 2 or more characters have a heart-to-heart, which is a lot, there's a pretty specific structure to the conversation. Usually Usually when it comes to both writing and acting, there's a few soft rules to abide by. Firstly, the characters will have secrets, things that they don't want to talk about that are key to the scenes that we find out about as it progresses. This is often the point of a scene. Secondly, they won't directly state their feelings, because people don't really do that, and it removes tension and character from the scene. Superman and Lois breaks both of these egregiously and very often. I started to notice this in early season 3, probably after being taken out of it by the whole "you disobeyed me" moment, but it's really one of those things where when you see it, you can't really unsee it. Every episode after that became a countdown to one of those scenes. There's the rare episode when it doesn't happen, but I believe it's 1 or 2 in seasons 3 and 4, which isn't a great track record. It's not just this is how it's usually done, so doing it in a different way is inherently bad. It actively makes the show worse. The scene structure doesn't lead up to a climax, it's all falling action. In a sense, we have what we want and need from the scene at the very start, and the rest is just what's necessary to say about our conclusion to move the plot forward. It's what has to happen, not what we want to happen. It's going through the motions to make everything make sense, but it's not engaging. It's waiting, it's boring, it's bad. The structure is, they explicitly say either what they themselves feel or what they know another person to feel, then they immediately work to a resolution of those feelings, and then they talk about it for a while. This happens basically every single episode, and it makes the show really hard to watch. It'll oscillate between pretty good Superman stuff and a little break to remind you that these other characters are also here, and extremely dull. I don't want to watch a show that's half a really good Superman show and half nothing. I just want to watch a good Superman show. So to be perfectly transparent with you, I hadn't watched the final 2 episodes yet. I figured they'd be more or less the same as the rest of the episodes, maybe slightly better. And then I watched them. The second to last episode is fine, at least by Superman and Lois standards. It's kinda just a normal episode that's more focused on the Superman part of the story. That being said, it had been a while since I watched the show, and it reminded me of what the show is like. This could have been a good episode if the writing, directing, and editing was better. The dialogue ranges from decent to cringy. Conversations between the characters are diced like onions to extract any possible life from them and turn them into the most tired shot reverse shot I've seen in a while. Actors that have been shown to be good in the past just aren't at times, which can only be a directing issue, and I forgot how ugly this show is. The character designs are one thing. Don't think I didn't notice that the Superman suit is basically black, by the way. This is much worse than it was in the earlier seasons. Even outside of that, the color grading is abysmal. It's inconsistent, bland, and makes basically every scene look ugly. Then there's the finale. The first 15 minutes of the finale are just kind of alright. It's very much a repeat of season 3's finale, with Doomsday being unleashed on Smallville by Lex Luthor to kill Superman. Only difference is that it doesn't work this time because of some random bomb that John Henry Irons had been working on. Of course, we hadn't seen this before, it just comes out of nowhere. It's just an excuse to weaken Lex exosuit so Superman can punch him harder. They just have John Henry say that he's been working on a prototype that messes up kryptonite and metal, the 2 things that just so happen to be relevant to the exosuit as a threat. They hit Doomsday with a hammer, and this is somehow enough to kill him for long enough for Clark to fly him into the sun? Okay, whatever, sure. It's wrapped up. Clearly rushed, but wrapped up nonetheless. Funny, that felt like much less than 40 minutes. Oh, a 1-year time skip. I'm sure that'll go well. Oh, Lana Lang and John Henry Irons are getting married now. That's weird. The episode literally started out with them saying they didn't think it'd work out, and it wasn't mentioned at all between then and now. But sure, they're married. In this time skip, we find out that Kyle and Christy had their baby from earlier in the season that had been forgotten about for a few episodes. And they have another one on the way. Lana and Kyle dance. Okay, whatever. Sarah's here again. So anyway, John and Nat have an introspective conversation, then Lois and Clark do. During their little chat, we find out that Lex Luthor is being sent back to Stryker's prison, the place that he practically ran before being released by Lois and Clark. This time though, he's not in charge, not because the prison system has improved in the years since Lois and Clark found out that it was a problem, but because Bruno Mannheim is in charge now. In other words, the system that allowed Luthor to prosper in prison hasn't been changed, it's just someone else who's benefiting from it. But surely, Superman and Lois Lane wouldn't be a fan of this, right? Of course they are. They work together with Mannheim to do something. It's not particularly clear what he specifically did, but the implication is that he helped them open medical facilities and feed the homeless. This is punitive justice at its finest, folks. Don't recognize the systems at play, just lock up the bad man so another bad man who is a little better can take advantage of him this time. Sure, dude, whatever. So that's the end. Oh, wait, no it's not. There's a 10-minute monologue where Clark outlines the rest of his life. He lived for 32 more years, and apparently, according to Clark, he only found out the world was struggling after he came back from the dead. Here's some stock footage of bad things happening. Okay, sure, so saving people wasn't enough for Clark over here, so now he wants to start doing things that help people on a broader scale. This is kind of stupid. They're just flashing it on screen, but this isn't meaningful in any way. Imagine if Spider-Man No Way Home ended with Peter giving a monologue in which he talks about enrolling in Empire State University and continuing Aunt May's efforts with Feast and a bunch of other bullshit. This is a worse ending, not just because it compromises what another director can do in the future, but because it is less meaningful to the movie itself. If you want Superman to learn that saving people isn't the same thing as helping people and doing more community outreach, you just had 4 seasons to do that. Don't insult me by flashing it on screen as a footnote. This is the jingling keys in front of a baby thing. Do something. By the way, for this monologue, they hired new actors to play the aged-up versions of Jonathan and Jordan. They did a ton of makeup for Clark and Lois aging, but they couldn't just change the hair and makeup for them two to make them seem a little older. For 3 scenes, by the way, they introduce wives for Jonathan and Jordan. Well, I say introduce, they're barely even there. They're not named. The most mention they get is they got married. Outside of that, the only reason that they're there is to facilitate the existence of the 7 children that Jonathan and Jordan have. They could have just ended it here, with Clark and Lois happy watching the sunset on their porch, knowing everything turned out okay. They could have ended it before this stupid monologue or before the time skip, but no, of course they didn't. The next 7 minutes of this show are maybe the most insulting in any Superman media. Lois's cancer came back, and then she dies. Lois, and Clark for that matter, spent seasons 2 and 3 confronting their mortality. They grew past it, lived through it, together. That's explicitly how they stayed strong during those events. Now, not even functionally in the show, in a tacked-on monologue, they ripped that out by the roots and killed her anyway. This is pretty disgusting to me. Lois survived cancer and had to deal with her life after that, come to terms with her body, her relationships with others, her job, all being compromised by it. And now it just comes back to kill her anyway in 3 lines of a monologue of someone else's. If it wasn't enough to insult Lois, they couldn't help but throw in Jordan and Jonathan too. They're there when she dies. It's the aged up actors. They didn't even put the actors they spent years working together with in the scene where she dies. So what happens then? Clark is alone, gets visited by people daily, but still feels empty. He gets a dog. He calls it Crypto. Remember the keys? They sure are jingling. Look, there's a mural about steelworks. That's a thing in the comics. Jingle jingle. And then Clark dies too. But can we end it with just him dying peacefully? No, of course not. Why would we do that? Let's have another scene of Clark's soul leaving his body and going to heaven. What? No, what if we didn't do that? By the way, his first words about dying are, "It was amazing." Fucking what? What level of sociopathy are we on here? They make a big point of not killing Luthor, then Lois says he's beyond saving, and now Clark says that dying is great, actually? What was the point of any of that then? If these are the facts, there's no argument you could possibly make for not killing Luthor. He's being tortured in Strikers now for literally no reason other than the fact that you didn't want to kill him. There's no hope for rehabilitation. There's no drive to keep everyone alive because death would make anything better impossible. It's just objectively wrong. But then Clark does forgive Luthor for killing him and all the other heinous shit he's done to everyone that is less privileged than Clark is for decades. Congratulations, man! That's so gracious of you. You still condemned him to torture until he dies, but you did it with forgiveness in your heart. That's awesome. This part of the monologue also doesn't work, by the way. They clearly couldn't think of a good word to describe Clark's relationship with Kyle and Chrissy, probably because he didn't really have one. So they put friendship there, then went to John Henry and Lana, the people that he had called his best friends during the wedding we just had. He says family for them, and after saying that, he turns to his children, his actual family, and he says nothing. The word that they were looking for, by the way, was community. Just putting that single word in there would have made this entire thing better and more consistent. That took me 1 minute to think of. They have a whole team of writers getting paid to make this. Then they open the door to the afterlife, and there is Lois in the dress she was wearing earlier in the show on their first date. Clark calls her beautiful and goes to the afterlife. I hate this. It would have been so much more impactful if Lois was older here. Put her makeup on 1 more time to make her the same age as Clark and have him call her beautiful when she's older. De-aging her and having her put on a special dress for him to call her beautiful undermines the relationship that you've spent this entire show building. Even if all of those things were accounted for, I'd still hate this, by the way. Its sloppy execution only adds to it, but Clark dying and going to the afterlife is the worst thing. At least when Smallville, the Donner movies, and the DCEU do a ton of Christian imagery, they have the decency to not smack you over the head with a culmination of the story being Clark having a religious experience and going to heaven. Just so we're clear, this is worse than the DCEU when it comes to the religious element. This passing into the afterlife stuff detracts from the entire story, not only because it cheapens everything and undermines the stakes by confirming that any of the characters dying at any point would have landed them in some other existence, not only by disrespecting Superman's Jewish roots by having his ending drenched in Christianity, but also because it renders huge parts of the story irrelevant. The ending of this show would have been better if this episode just didn't exist and it ended with Doomsday yoinking Superman again. I would actually prefer that to this any day. The ending to this show paints everything in a bad light. It lines up a number of things that feel less and less like Superman and more like a tradcon power fantasy. Superman is a power fantasy. That's not really something you can avoid. It comes with being a superhero. But this show casts that in a very specific way. The concept of it is already kind of in that spirit. Superman has a wife and 2 children and moves back to the countryside to live a calm and domestic life outside of the big city. Forget that this sacrifices Lois's career and every part of Jonathan and Jordan's life outside of the family itself. Wild choice to have Lois Lane give up her career in journalism to move to Smallville with Clark. And what do we see for the rest of the show? We see Clark exerting his power over his children, shaming them whenever they step out of line. We see him be the man of the family, picking a fight with a man who pulled a gun on his wife and hit his kid. During the last 2 episodes, he repeats something along the lines of, "I'm their father, it's my job to protect them," no less than 5 times. This is a narrative. It's not individually a bad thing to stand up for the people you love, but when it's specifically the man that does it for everyone, there's more to it. Clark also saves Lois from the interview with Lex Luthor that goes south. Steel is only in the show to begin with to avenge an alternate universe version of Lois. Kyle does the same thing for Lana and Chrissy. It is a pattern. Note that every adult in the show has children. Lois and Clark have 2. Alternate Lois and Steel have 1. Kyle and Lana, Kyle and Chrissy. Now that John Henry and Lana are married, he is also the father to Sarah and her sister. Sam Lane has 2 kids as well. The least amount of children any relevant adult character has in the show is 2. This includes Jordan and Jonathan, who are 15 or 16 until the last episode. They actually age them up for the express purpose of giving them exorbitant amounts of children. This is weird. It may not be the only thing the show is about. Hell, I doubt that it's intentional, but the religious elements, family dynamics, and emphasis on childbirth, and the strange pattern of female characters not having a job at the beginning of their stories or quitting when they have kids all come together to form a strangely conservative-shaped cloud over the whole show. Ultimately, Superman and Lois has some great stuff in it, especially with, well, Superman and Lois. When the show broadens the scope outside of those characters, however, it starts to fall apart. As much as I want to love the show, I can't get there. And the ending burned me considerably. Luckily, the DCU is looking up, and there's plenty of Superman to come in the future. But until then, don't forget to exercise your authority over your children, and have a good one.